It's back-to-back top 10 wins for Eala. What a fabulous week she's having. A fabulous month on the grass as well.
3 days, 3 elite opponents, 3 straight-set wins. And now the tennis world is asking a question nobody expected to hear in Berlin this week, because there is a moment, just seconds before the serve, when a 19-year-old stands completely still on a court in Berlin. If you didn't know better, you'd think nothing important was happening at all. No big gesture, no dramatic expression, no sign that history might be about to bend in real time. But in that stillness, everything was about to change. And what makes this story so fascinating is that almost nobody in that stadium fully understood what they were witnessing as it happened. Not the fans, not the commentators, not even the people sitting inside her own box. Because what happened next forced the entire sport to confront one very uncomfortable question: how is this possible? And maybe an even more unsettling one: who exactly is going to stop her? Right now, nobody has that answer. And by the time this story is over, you probably won't either. Her name is Eala. And if the rest of the tennis world didn't know it before this week, they know it now. In fact, in a matter of days, it may become impossible to ignore. But to understand why Berlin suddenly feels like a turning point, you have to go back to the moment almost nobody cared about. The quiet moment. The one that barely made noise. The moment Alex entered the tournament as a wild card, which in tennis is usually just a polite way of saying, enjoy the experience, but nobody expects you to stay very long. That is the role wild cards are supposed to play. They are expected to show up, compete hard, maybe make a few highlights, smile for the cameras, take a respectful glance at the trophy from a distance, and head home before the tournament really begins to matter. A wild card is not supposed to rewrite the entire storyline of the week. A wild card is not supposed to hijack the draw and turn top players into supporting characters in her own breakout story. But apparently nobody told Eala any of that. Round 1 was supposed to be the beginning of the end. Across the net stood Donna Vekic, the reigning Queen's Club champion, a proven grass court player, the kind of opponent a teenage wild card is expected to learn from, not beat. This was supposed to be a tough lesson, a respectable effort, and then an early exit. Instead, Alex walked onto that court and won, not with chaos, not with luck, not with a desperate one-off upset that could be explained away by nerves or a bad day from the favorite. She won cleanly, she won convincingly, she won in a way that immediately made people pause. Still, the reaction was cautious. Upsets happen, every tournament has one. A seeded player comes out flat, the underdog swings freely, the match gets away, and everyone moves on. That was the version of the story people wanted to believe, because the alternative was much harder to process. If this wasn't just a one-match surprise, then something much bigger might be happening. And then came round 2. This is where the story stops feeling like a fun upset and starts feeling like a warning shot to the rest of the tour, because waiting for Alex on the other side of the net was Eala. If you don't follow tennis closely, here's what that means. Rybakina is not just dangerous. She is one of the most intimidating players you can draw on grass. A former Wimbledon champion, one of the cleanest ball strikers in the game. A server capable of taking control of a match in minutes and making even elite opponents look helpless. When Rybakina is in rhythm, points disappear quickly, games vanish even faster, and matches can feel over before they've really begun. She doesn't just beat players. She overwhelms them, strips them of time, and leaves them searching for answers they usually never find. So when Eala stepped onto the court against her, the assumption hanging over the stadium was brutally simple. This is where the dream ends. This was supposed to be the wall, the reality check, the moment the tournament snapped back into order and reminded everyone that wild cards do not keep beating champions on grass. This was where the fairy tale was supposed to run out of pages. Except Alex didn't just survive Rybakina's serve. She solved it. That's what made the match so shocking. She didn't spend the afternoon scrambling, guessing, and hanging on by a thread. She read patterns. She anticipated direction. She absorbed pace and redirected it like she had seen this challenge before. Point by point, she broke down one of the most feared serves in women's tennis, as if she had found an answer the rest of the field hadn't discovered yet. And then she did the unthinkable. She beat Elena Rybakina in straight sets. Take a second to really process what that requires. Rybakina's serve is not just powerful. It's disorienting. It rushes you, stretches you, and forces split-second decisions at angles most players never get comfortable with. To handle it, you can't just react late and hope for the best. You have to recognize early, move decisively, and stay mentally sharp on every single point, because one lapse is usually enough for her to take over a game. Alex didn't guess right once or twice. She got it right often enough to win 2 full sets against one of the most dangerous grass-court players in the sport. That was the moment everything changed, not just inside the stadium, but across the tennis world. Phones lit up, group chats exploded, commentators stopped using the word surprise because surprise no longer felt big enough. Something else was happening now, something harder to define and much harder to dismiss. The conversation was no longer about whether Eala had produced a nice upset. The conversation had become whether the sport was watching a genuine breakthrough unfold in real time. And if that wasn't enough, the draw offered her no mercy at all, because waiting next was Eala Svitolina. Now this was a completely different kind of threat. If Rybakina is a storm, Svitolina is a trap. She doesn't overpower you in obvious ways. She doesn't need to. She turns matches into mental examinations. She extends rallies, tests your patience, drags you into long exchanges, and keeps asking the same question over and over. How disciplined are you really? Are you still focused? Are your legs still there? Can you make one more good decision? Can you hold your nerve one more time? For a 19-year-old coming off the biggest win of her career, this was supposed to be the danger zone. This was supposed to be the emotional letdown match, the one where the adrenaline finally disappears and the older, smarter, more experienced opponent quietly takes control. This was the spot where the fairy tale usually cracks, the body gets heavy, the concentration dips. The underdog finally looks like an underdog again. Everyone watching was waiting for that moment. It never came, in fact. What happened was somehow even more impressive. Alex got calmer, not louder, not reckless, not carried away by the emotion of the moment. Calmer, that's what made this third win feel so different. Against a player like Svitolina, you usually see the warning signs early if a young opponent is starting to unravel. A rushed forehand, a careless miss, a bad shot selection at the wrong time. Tiny clues that the pressure is rising and the mind is moving faster than it should. But none of that showed up in Alex's game. She slowed the tempo when she needed to. She stayed composed in extended rallies. She absorbed pressure without looking suffocated by it. She played like someone who had already decided, long before the first ball was struck, that this was not going to be the day her run ended. And when the final point landed, when the third straight elite opponent had fallen, the realization hit the tennis world all at once. This is not luck. Luck does not beat 3 completely different world-class players in a row. Luck does not carry a teenager through a grass-court champion, a Wimbledon winner, and one of the smartest competitors on tour in the span of a few days. Luck does not explain a player solving 3 totally different styles back to back to back, adjusting in real time, and never once looking overwhelmed by the stage. So if it isn't luck, then what is it? That's the question hanging over this tournament now. It's the question echoing through locker rooms, media rooms, and fan conversations all over the sport. And maybe the most uncomfortable part is that the answer might be much simpler than anyone wants to admit. She might just be better than people realized. Not good for a wild card. Not impressive for a teenager. Not a nice story for 1 week. Just better. Better right now than the tennis world had properly accounted for. And if you want proof, don't just watch the winners. Watch everything in between. Watch the walk back to the baseline after a mistake. Watch the shoulders stay level. Watch the face stay quiet. Watch the eyes. They do not dart around with panic. They do not beg for reassurance. They do not carry the expression of someone hoping to survive one more game. She looks like someone in control of her own pace, her own breathing, her own match. Towel. Bounce the ball. Breathe. Reset. The routine is the same after a brilliant winner as it is after a frustrating error. No emotional swing. No visible crack in the rhythm. No sign that she is shocked to be on this stage. And that may be the most revealing part of all, because that is not the body language of a player who thinks she's overachieving. That is the body language of a player who expected this moment, trusted it, and is simply waiting for everyone else to catch up. Because talent alone has never been enough in professional tennis. The lower levels of the sport are full of talented players with gorgeous strokes, explosive movement, and all the physical tools in the world. Most of them never truly break through, not because they can't hit the ball, not because they don't work, but because talent without total belief can only take you so far. It leaves you standing outside the door without ever turning the handle. What changes everything is the moment a player stops hopping she belongs and starts knowing she does. And that is what Berlin feels like right now. It feels like the week Eala stopped asking for permission. The week she stopped being introduced as an interesting young prospect and started looking like a real threat to anyone standing across the net. The week the sport realized this isn't just a promising future story anymore. This is a present tense problem for the rest of the field, because now the question is no longer whether Eala can compete with the elite on grass. She already answered that. The question is what happens next when the draw gets tighter, the pressure gets heavier, and every opponent steps on court fully aware that this teenager is no longer a nice surprise but a genuine danger. That is where the story gets even more fascinating, because the wins have already changed the conversation. She has beaten power, she has beaten precision, she has beaten patience. She has done it without dropping a set. And she has done it in a way that doesn't feel fluky or fragile. It feels repeatable, it feels real. And that is exactly why the rest of the tour should be nervous. Because once a young player discovers not only that she can live on this stage, but that she can control matches on it, the ceiling becomes very hard to see. Confidence starts compounding. Opponents begin carrying doubt onto the court before the first point is even played. Suddenly, every matchup changes. Every scouting report changes. Every expectation changes. That is the power of a week like this. 3 days, 3 elite players, 3 straight-set wins. And now the tennis world is left staring at one impossible question. Was Berlin just the site of a magical run, or was it the moment Eala announced herself as the next real force in women's tennis? Right now, nobody knows the full answer. But after what happened this week, nobody can pretend the question isn't real anymore. Coaches talk about this shift all the time, almost obsessively, because it's the one part of development you can't manufacture on a practice court. You can build a serve in the gym. You can sharpen footwork with endless drills. You can improve balance, timing, and endurance through repetition. But belief doesn't work like that. Confidence at this level cannot simply be handed to you by a coach or created by doing extra reps. It has to be earned, usually the hard way. Usually in the middle of a match where someone on the other side of the net is fully expected to end your run. And that's what makes this week in Berlin feel so important. Because something about these 3 matches, something about the way Eala has navigated this tournament, feels like the exact moment that belief fully arrived. You can almost trace it happening in real time if you watch closely enough. It wasn't after beating Donna Vekic. As impressive as that was, it could still be explained away as a hot start, a player catching fire for one afternoon, a favorite having an off day. And it probably wasn't even immediately after the Rybakina win either, because adrenaline can carry a player through one massive upset. Sometimes emotion can lift you higher than your normal level for a match or two before reality comes rushing back in. No, if there was a true turning point, it felt like it came somewhere in the middle of the Svitolina match, somewhere in that dangerous stretch where most young players begin to feel the walls closing in. That's the stage of a match where the scoreboard starts to feel heavier, where the legs begin to tighten, where the mind suddenly remembers exactly what's at stake. It's the point where inexperience usually reveals itself. But instead of shrinking from the moment, Alex seemed to grow into it. She didn't back away from the pressure. She expanded inside it. She looked more certain, more composed, more willing to take ownership of the match as it got tighter. And that is the part that should make every remaining player in this tournament deeply uncomfortable, because there is a special kind of danger in an athlete who stops playing not to lose and starts playing to win. Once that shift happens, everything changes. The calculations change, the choices change, the willingness to take risks changes. The player on the other side of the net is no longer just facing a talented opponent with a good forehand and a dangerous return game. They're facing conviction. They're facing someone who no longer sees herself as the underdog trying to survive, but as the one who gets to dictate the terms. And mindsets are much harder to solve than mechanics. You can scout a forehand. You can break down a serve pattern. You can study tendencies on second serve, favorite backhand targets, movement patterns under pressure, and preferred plays on break points. Those are all things coaches can prepare for, but belief is different. Belief doesn't show up in the scouting report the same way. You cannot diagram confidence on a whiteboard. You cannot rehearse what it feels like to play someone who suddenly believes she belongs on every big stage she steps onto. And that is exactly the problem the rest of this draw now has to deal with in a matter of days, not months. But here, where this story gets even more interesting, because the timing of all of it makes the stakes explode without anyone needing to say a word. This isn't happening in the middle of the hard-court season. It isn't unfolding months away from a major when players still have time to adjust, regroup, and convince themselves it was just one strange week. This is happening right before Wimbledon, not a month before, not even a few weeks before, days before the most prestigious tournament in tennis, the event every player circles on the calendar the moment the season begins, the championship that defines careers and shapes legacies long after trophies have been polished and packed away. And that timing matters because grass rewards exactly the qualities Alex has been showing all week: quick decision-making, early ball striking, fearless court positioning. Clean timing, the courage to step forward and take the ball before the rally can settle, the instinct to attack the exact moment most players hesitate. These aren't random strengths that just happen to appear for one lucky stretch in Berlin. These are grass-court weapons. These are the traits that make this surface so unforgiving for anyone who hesitates and so rewarding for anyone brave enough to take control of it. That's what makes this week feel so dangerous for everyone else and so perfectly timed for her. Grass punishes uncertainty in a way clay never does. On clay, there's room to recover. There's time to slide, reset, and work your way back into a point. You can survive a moment of indecision because the surface gives you a little more time to think, a little more time to defend, a little more time to turn a bad position into a neutral one. Grass gives you none of that mercy. On grass, hesitation is a sentence. The points are quicker, the bounces stay lower, and the margin for doubt shrinks dramatically. There is no time for a 30-shot rally while you figure things out. There is no luxury of slowly playing yourself into confidence. Decisions have to be made immediately, and usually the player who makes them first controls everything. And right now, Alex Eala has been making those decisions faster than 3 of the best players in the world. That is not a small detail. That is the story. A few weeks ago, if someone had suggested Alex could make a serious run at Wimbledon, the response would have been polite at best. People might have nodded. They might have called her talented, promising, exciting for the future. But beneath all of that would have been quiet skepticism, the kind that says, maybe one day, but not yet. She was still viewed as a rising name, a player with potential, someone worth watching down the road. Berlin may have changed that in a single week. Because after what she has done here, the conversation is no longer about whether Alex Eala is talented enough to one day threaten the elite. The conversation is whether the elite are now being forced to deal with her much sooner than they expected. And that's a very different discussion. That shift, from polite skepticism to genuine concern, happened almost overnight. A week ago, the biggest Wimbledon contenders were not spending much time thinking about Alex Eala. They had bigger names to prepare for, bigger threats in the draw, bigger storylines dominating the conversation. But after Berlin, that luxury may be gone. Now she isn't just a promising teenager with upside. She's a player who has just dismantled 3 world-class opponents in straight sets on the very surface that is about to host the biggest tournament in the sport. And that changes everything. Because now every opponent who sees her name in the draw has to confront a new reality. This is no longer a match they can treat like a routine early-round test. This is no longer the kind of name you glance at and move past without concern. Alex Eala has turned herself into a question nobody wants to answer and a matchup nobody can take lightly. She has become the kind of player who forces others to rethink their path before Wimbledon has even begun. That is the real impact of Berlin, not just the wins themselves, but the fear those wins create. Because tennis players notice more than scorelines. They notice body language, they notice timing, they notice when a player is no longer simply riding momentum, but actually controlling matches with clarity and purpose. They notice when a young player starts carrying herself like someone who expects to beat top opponents rather than hopes to compete with them. And once that happens, the entire energy around that player changes. That's where Alex is now. She is no longer arriving as a nice story. She is arriving as a threat. And with Wimbledon only days away, that may be the most important development of all. Let that sink in for a second, because shifts like this almost never happen so quickly in professional sports. And when they do, they usually signal something much bigger than one hot week or one surprising tournament run. They tend to mark the beginning of a larger story, the kind people only fully understand once they're looking back on it months or years later. But there's another layer to what's happening here, one that goes far beyond rankings, beyond the draw, beyond who wins the next match and who doesn't. Somewhere far away from Berlin, in homes across the Philippines, in crowded living rooms, neighborhood courts, school gyms. And on cracked public courts where kids stay out until the light disappears, people are watching this happen in real time. Young players are staying up late to see a teenager from their country walk onto one of the biggest stages in tennis and beat players they've only ever known as names on a screen. They're watching someone who looks like them, who comes from where they come from, stand across the net from champions and refuse to be intimidated by any of it. That kind of impact doesn't show up in a box score. It doesn't fit neatly into a ranking update or a tournament recap. And it doesn't disappear when the week is over. It plants something much deeper. It changes what feels possible. It tells an entire generation of young athletes that the distance between watching greatness and becoming greatness may not be as impossible as they were taught to believe. Think about what that means to a 10-year-old kid somewhere in the Philippines, hitting tennis balls against a worn-out wall, imagining a stage that has always felt impossibly far away. Think about what it means to suddenly see that distance shrink in real time on live television. To watch someone from your own country step into that space and not just survive there, but own it. That's the part of this story that lives beyond the scoreline. Win or lose from here, that part of the impact is already permanent. And yet for all of that, the story still isn't finished. That's the part you have to sit with. As extraordinary as this run has already been, the semifinal still waits ahead, untouched and unwritten. Another opponent still stands between Eala and a final that would have sounded almost absurd to say out loud just a week ago. And that is where sports become cruel in the most fascinating way, because momentum is the most powerful force in the world right up until the exact moment it is. Every great run in sports feels unstoppable right before it ends. Every nobody can stop her headline eventually collides with the one player who can. Sports history is filled with stories like that, breakout weeks that looked like the beginning of a dynasty until the very next match quietly shut the door. And the hardest part is that nobody ever knows in the moment which version of the story they're watching. Are they witnessing the start of something lasting or the absolute peak of a magical week that may never be repeated in quite the same way? You usually don't know until it's already over. That is the real question hanging over the rest of this tournament. Is this the beginning of a genuine takeover in women's tennis? Or is this the most spectacular high point of a young career so far, the kind of run people will always remember fondly even if it never quite turns into something bigger? Nobody knows, not the analysts, not the commentators, maybe not even Alex herself. And that uncertainty is exactly what makes this story impossible to ignore, because every single match from here carries the weight of an answer nobody has yet. But here's what we do know, and this part is no longer up for debate. No matter what happens in the next round, Eala has already beaten a Queen's Club champion. She has already beaten a former Wimbledon champion. She has already beaten one of the most dangerous and informed players on the entire tour. 3 matches, 3 completely different challenges, 3 completely different puzzles, and 3 straight-set solutions. That is not random. That is not a lucky streak. And at some point, continuing to call it a surprise says more about how little people expected from her than it does about what she is actually capable of. Somewhere in Berlin right now, another opponent is probably sitting in a hotel room, watching replays from all 3 of those matches, searching for the weakness nobody else could find, looking for the one crack in the armor that has somehow stayed hidden all week. Maybe they'll find it, maybe they won't. That's the part nobody can predict. And that uncertainty is exactly what turns the next match into must-watch television. So as Berlin moves closer to its final rounds, as the pressure rises and the stakes grow heavier and the tennis world leans in just a little more, remember this exact moment. Remember the stillness before that very first serve against Donna Vekic. Because somewhere inside that silence, before the headlines, before the disbelief, before anyone knew what was coming, this story had already started writing itself. A story nobody saw coming. A story that is still unfolding in real time. A story whose ending is still completely unknown. And that is why you keep watching, not just the semifinal, not just the next point, every match that follows, because what you're seeing right now is not the end of a story. It's the middle of one, the most dangerous part, the most fascinating part, the part where anything is still possible and where history often looks ordinary until the moment it suddenly doesn't. And whatever happens next, Whether Berlin becomes the tournament that changed everything or simply the moment we all look back on as the true beginning of something even bigger, one truth already feels impossible to ignore. The rankings may still say Eala is chasing the best players in the world. Berlin is beginning to suggest that the best players in the world may soon be chasing her. So when the semifinal arrives, and it will arrive faster than anyone feels ready for, watch closely. Because somewhere in that match is the next chapter of a story that has already refused to behave the way anyone expected. And if sports history has taught us anything about moments like this, it's that the players who make the world ask, "Who's going to stop her?" rarely stay in that space for long. They either fade quietly back into the pack, remembered only as a brief and brilliant surprise, or they become the answer to the question everyone was asking about them in the first place. Right now in Berlin, on a grass court that has humbled bigger names and bigger reputations before her, Eala is standing directly at that fork in the road. And nobody, not the experts, not the fans, not even the players preparing to face her, knows which version of this story they're about to get. That is the part that should stay with you long after this video ends. Not just the scoreline, not just the bracket, not even the upset itself, the not knowing. Because somewhere between a wildcard entry and a semifinal run nobody saw coming, a teenager from the Philippines flipped an entire sport's expectations upside down in the span of a single week. And whatever happens next, that part of the story can never be undone.